say a little prayer as we begin tonight. We may say some others that come in a little bit late tonight, or maybe they've got activities and they'll be coming other weeks, but I'm glad you guys could make it out here tonight. I know Tuesday nights are busy. We talked about doing a parenting teenagers class and thinking, during the week everyone's parenting their teenagers, so they probably don't have a lot of time to be here. So I know, so this is your break. Just so you know, we'll probably go till around 8 o'clock. It might surprise some of you, but once I talk for a long period of time, I get bored with listening to myself, and so when I get to that point, I'm sure that you guys are as well. So we'll try to get out of here by around 8 o'clock tonight, but I want to open up with prayer. So God, thank you just for this evening. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. We thank you that you are a God that is always working, and for some of us who are here tonight, and we're all in different places, some of us are here because maybe we're facing a challenge right now with a teenager or a preteen, and we're looking for answers. Others of us may be here, and we have a good relationship with our kids, but we want to know how we can make it better and keep open those lines of communication. Lord, I know that many of us in here have kind of the same end result we want to see, which is that our kids would grow up to follow you and to love you with all of their heart. That's our desire. That's our heart as parents, and sometimes the journey getting there is difficult. It's rocky. Sometimes we can even lose hope or feel fatalistic, like there's no hope. But remind us that with man, what is impossible, with God, nothing is impossible. So just remind us of that. Encourage us through this class. May we be able to take some tools and things that will help us as we raise our kids. We love you, God, and we thank you for these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So for those of you guys who do not know who I am, most of you probably, a couple of you I met for the first time tonight, but my name is Troy Jester, and I actually graduated from Huntington University in 1997 with a degree in youth ministry and worked as a youth pastor for 18 years here at the church, and a few years ago decided that I wanted, for whatever reason, to work with adults instead of with teenagers, and sometimes it's more difficult working with adults than it is with teenagers. But I love teenagers. I loved working with teenagers, and even today, although I'm not a youth pastor, I hang out at a place that Bonnie hangs out on a regular basis. You come in and I use it at Powerhouse Youth Center and hang out with teenagers there. And I actually have a couple of teenagers. So this is, for those of you guys who don't, the picture, the screens aren't the greatest, but this is a picture of my three daughters. Aubrey is 20 years old, and she's the one with the Grace College sweatshirt on. She's a sophomore at Grace, and she is in the occupational therapy program. She'd like to be an occupational therapist. Katie is the one to the left of me. She's a little shorter than her younger sister, which she's not real excited about, but Katie is 19 years old, and she is a freshman at St. Francis. She was interested in doing the PA program there, but she has decided for right now she's going to do nursing. So she's in the nursing program at St. Francis. And then Kylie is a freshman at Lakewood Park, and she's actually here tonight teaching. She teaches dance for Living Grace, and so she's doing that. So those are my three daughters, and then my wife is here tonight too, Michelle. For those of you guys who do not know her, make sure we got the right wife. So yeah, so we've been married. So we waited 2 years to have kids, and we've had kids ever since. So parenting teenagers, we've enjoyed it for the most part. Actually, I'll talk throughout the class that our difficult years, I think, more so were when our kids were young. The teenage years actually have in some ways been better for us than the younger years. But we've learned a lot, and I feel like as a youth pastor, I kind of had an unfair advantage of learning a lot of things, growing up and watching how kids turned out and what I was learning that was good and what wasn't. Like, as a youth pastor, I felt like I had an added advantage. Like, I had some lessons taught to me even as I was going through it. So, but if you have your manuals, you'll see the first part is a course description. Most of you guys are familiar with what we're going to do. I have some learning outcomes, some things that I want to accomplish throughout the class, things such as identifying the major tasks of adolescence, which tonight we're going to talk a lot about. We're going to do some developmental theory tonight of just understanding the different aspects of adolescence, the different ages, what we need to accomplish at each one of those ages. Learn the goals of parenting God's way. So tonight, those are kind of our two main ideas, is what does parenting God's way look like versus the way the world parents, and understanding developmental theory. The second class, we're going to talk about properly instituting boundaries and discipline, which I'm assuming for a lot of you who are here, that's one of the key things that you have questions about, is how do we instill boundaries, how do we do discipline, how do we work through rules, all different kinds of things like that. So second week will be real practical in regards to boundaries, discipline, and rule. The third week, we're going to talk a lot about being a learner of student culture. This is something I'm really passionate about, that as parents, we become a learner of the culture that our students are a part of. I know this is hard for some of you because you can't stand the music that teenagers listen to. You can't stand the teenage shows that your teenagers listen to. You would prefer just to kind of be in your own world. But I think one of the main ways that you can connect with your kids is through understanding their culture and their world. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do that effectively. And then the final week is to understand why passing on a positive, affirming legacy is so important and why a negative legacy can be so destructive. And I know for some of you who are here tonight, you didn't have the privilege of maybe, like I did, of my mom and my dad both passing down a faith legacy to me. They modeled what that looked like. They weren't perfect in that, but I had a legacy of faith that was passed down to me. And I know for some of you, you're here tonight, and maybe you didn't grow up with that legacy. You know, maybe you're the first generation that's trying to do it different than those before you. And so we're going to talk a little bit about legacy and how we can start a positive legacy, an emotional legacy, a spiritual legacy, a social legacy. So hopefully some of those will be helpful to you guys. On the next page, you're going to see some recommended resources for growth, some of the resources that I've used to prepare for this class, and I've got some of them up here if you want to take a look afterwards. This is a book called Parenting 14 Gospel Principles That Can Radically Change Your Family. This is not listed in your resource manual, but this was the basis of the class I taught this spring on biblical parenting, so it had to do with younger children. But it's a great book. It's one of my favorite books. This is a recent book. It's very similar to, have any of you guys heard Shepherding Your Child's Heart, the book Shepherding Your Child's Heart? It's a great book by Ted Tripp. This book was written by his brother Paul David Tripp, and it's called Parenting. This is a great book, a great resource to have. I would definitely recommend, especially as a foundational resource for young parents, if you guys would like to use that. Couple other books. Fuller Seminary out in California is one of the leaders in teenage culture, understanding teenage culture, what teenagers need. They do a lot of statistical analysis and throw out all kinds of surveys on youth. And they've written 2 books. One's called Sticky Faith, Everyday Ideas to Build Lasting Faith in Your Kids. Again, all of these are listed here, but Sticky Faith is a good book. And then they've just done a second book, which just came out, which is called Growing With, and it's Every Parent's Guide to Helping Teenagers and Young Adults Thrive in Faith, Family, and Future. Both of those are good books, a little bit more college level sort of thinking. And then 2 more books. Are any of you familiar with the books Boundaries? So there's Boundaries in Marriage, Boundaries with Teens. This is actually written by Dr. John Townsend. And it's a great book on especially dealing with discipline and rules and boundaries and difficult experiences that we have to go through, disrespectful attitudes, impossible situations that you face with your teens. This is a great book on rules and how to set boundaries with your kids. And then this one is by Jim Burns, and this is kind of one of the core books that I used in preparation for this class. It's called Understanding Your Teen, Shaping Their Character, Facing Their Realities. And Jim Burns is a youth pastor as well, but he also now goes around and he teaches, and he has a ministry called Homeward, which is really great dealing with teenagers. So all of those are additional resources. As I come to you today, I'm not the expert in all of this. We have not been perfect parents. We've failed many times. The way I come to you tonight is that I want you to succeed. I believe our teenagers are a wonderful resource. I'm passionate about seeing parents not only just survive the teenage years, but actually thrive during the teenage years if that's possible. And so that's my desire. That's what my hope is. That's what my prayer would be for you guys. And so that's kind of why we want to do what we're doing tonight, okay? So as we begin, and I will also say this, I want this class to be very interactive. And I know for some of you, Having conversations with other people is like your worst nightmare. But I think there's something that can be very helpful with learning from other people who are doing this thing. Maybe they've been through it, they're at a different phase than we are. And so there'll be some times where I actually give you guys an opportunity just to talk at your table about some of the realities that you're facing with your kids or with your grandkids or whatever that might be. Vicki had actually thought about live streaming some of these classes, and as we talked today, I want to give this to be a safe place where you guys can have these conversations and not worry that it's going to be live streamed what you're facing with your teenagers or anything like that. So I do want to be able to have some interaction at the table. So there'll be some elements where we could do that, and then we'll come back, and so hopefully this can be interactive as well. Okay? So if you'd like to turn to page 1, we're going to start with some basic human lifespan development sorts of things. Some of this might be you've seen this before, but I just thought we'd go through it a little bit about the human lifespan. And in each one of these parts of human life, the life stage development, there's some main things that our kids need to develop during those lifespans that if they're not developed at that time, those can cause some issues or things that can be lifelong or lasting. So we need to be thinking through the human lifespan. Erickson calls it psychosocial stages of development. And so you'll see in each one of these age groups, there's something that kids need to develop. For example, we'll start with the prenatal period, which is conception to birth. There's not a lot that you can do with your kids on that phase. They're inside of you, obviously. So that's a time where you're probably not going to make too many mistakes that are going to be ongoing. That's the prenatal period. After that is infancy, which is primarily birth to 12 months of age. And what a child is wanting or needing to develop during this time is basic trust. And a child at this age will wonder, am I safe? This is the nurturing period where some of you mothers, this was probably your favorite period because this was the bonding time with your child. But for a lot of teens, a lot of kids, they never really had that bonding moment. So at a period where they should have been developing trust, sometimes we've experienced where kids have actually learned to mistrust and they've experienced fear because of doubt or because of mistrust with whatever environment they learned or grew up in. So for example, in certain parts of our world, I was in Haiti last week. There's a lot of kids, many of those kids go immediately into like an orphanage because their parents are not able to provide for them. And so there's a lot of things that can happen in regards to like failure to thrive. In fact, our little nephew, Ben, is from China, and he was in an orphanage almost directly after birth and was just adopted by Michelle's sister a few years ago. And he had failure to thrive. So he's like 5 years old right now, I believe. Is he 5? He's almost 6, but he's the size of probably a 2-year-old. And developmentally, he's been very, very behind. It's actually been great. Like the last number of months, he's actually, I don't know if he can do 5 words together. He's right around 5 in a few things, but I mean, literally as of a couple months ago, to get him to say, I love you, all together was a difficult thing. He goes to therapy almost every week, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. He's come a long, long ways, but you just see even today, those things that he dealt with when he was really young are still affecting him. So it's really important that in each of these stages, certain things happen. The second is toddlerhood, which would be like 12 to 15 months to 2 to 3 years of age. And this is the time of life where it's autonomy versus shame and doubt. There are probably 2 main phases of your kid's life where you have experienced them wanting to be in control all the time, okay? Like when our kids are toddlers, right? Me do, me do, me do, me do. It's like they're, for the first time, it's autonomy. Like they want to do everything. They want to pee. They want to go to the bathroom on their own, and they end up peeing all over everything. They can't do it, but they're convinced that they're the best at it, right? It's independence. Give me my autonomy. The second main period of life where that happens is teenagers. It's like they go back, but the decisions that they're making are a lot more, they matter a lot more than just like peeing properly on the potty. But this is a big time where kids are asking, is it okay to be me? Is it okay to be me? And if they develop that, if it is, they develop self-confidence at that age. If not, they develop shame and self-doubt. And so again, some of you can see, and just people that you know, or maybe in your own experience, you've seen kids who have grown up doubting, having shame, self-doubt, all those sorts of things, and they go all the way back to when we're little. The next phase is early childhood, which is 2 to 3 years to 5 or 6 years. The phase here is initiative. It's preschool on there, initiative versus guilt. This is when they want to try out new things, most of our kids. And they're asking, is it okay for me to do what I do? Is it okay for me to do what I do? If they're encouraged, they'll follow their interest. And if they're held back, they might develop guilt. So each one of these phases, just different things that they're learning. School age, and this is middle to late childhood, about 6 to 12 years of age. Industry versus inferiority is how Erickson puts it. And they're asking, the question they're asking here is, can we make it in this world? Can I make it in this world? And if they, this is when they're wanting to excel and be noticed for like little art pictures or projects that they do. They want the best project. They want people to recognize if they're doing a good job. They come home excited, look what I did, and they're looking to receive affirmation at this age. And if they're recognized, a lot of times they become industrious. Like they keep wanting to achieve because they're being recognized for these amazing things that they're doing. But if not, they might lose motivation. I mean, if they're kind of pushed off to the side or ignored, that child is going to lose motivation. So we're dealing with things like a loss of motivation, shame, doubt, mistrust, all of those kind of things. And then we get to adolescence. And this is identity versus role confusion. I think one of the craziest things about adolescents is that they want to blend in so bad, that they want to fit in so much so, but they want to be totally autonomous and have freedom to do whatever they want to do. So this is a time of a lot of confusion. Like, I want to be different than everyone else, but I want to blend and I want to fit in. It's like you see that battle going on all the time. They have many different roles. They're trying to figure out who they are. Some days they might be goth, and then a few weeks later they might decide to be a cowboy, and then a few weeks later, like they're just whatever I need to be and whoever I need to be to fit into wherever I need to fit in right now, I'll do that. And what ends up happening is sometimes they're confused. They're confused and they're frustrated, and they feel lost sometimes. They go through an identity crisis at this age. So that's kind of the focus of this class, is on that phase of life. Young adulthood, this is where I'm at with 2 of our 3, and this is a new phase. There's all different things you're dealing with at this age. One of the things I'm learning, the biggest thing I've learned over the last couple months, now that I have a daughter who is an adult but living at home, is that she is not really wanting unsolicited advice from me. I find myself, because she's still living in the home, I find myself wanting to give advice so that she'll turn out to however I want her to turn out, like get a job, do this. And a lot of that is not going really well. And so I'm learning that as a parent now, I need to give advice when it's asked for, but just trust and believe that all of the training that we've done leading up to this point, that we pray that she'll make good decisions and godly decisions, but if she doesn't, I'm not responsible for that. That's not within my control, so the control freak in me needs to lay that aside and just love and care, offer advice when it's asked for, but I'm wrestling through how we do that, So, and then you get middle adulthood, which is probably most of us in here, 40 to 65, generativity versus stagnation, and then maturity. I guess maturity would be considered 60 to 65 up would be maturity. And so these are just some stages of development. In regards to timing, you'll see on your list timing and duration of adolescence. This is crazy to me. So back in like pre-1900, puberty actually began in general, and it always typically starts with the female younger than the male. But the year that puberty began in 1900, pre-1900, was 14.5 years old. That's when kids were actually going through puberty. And they would incorporate into culture at around 16, right? So, a lot of times there was arranged marriages, so they would grow up in the home, and then by 16, they're out doing their thing. They might be married, have a job. So from the time of puberty to being out on their own was about a year and a half, pre-1900. The term teenager was actually first introduced in 1941. That's the first time anybody used the word teenager, because there really wasn't before that a time of life where there was adolescence. It was literally, you were a kid, you went through puberty, and you were an adult. But by 1980, puberty was beginning at around age 13, and students were incorporating into culture at about 18 to 20 years old. All right? So now you got about a, 7 to 9 year period of adolescence. Well, where are we at today? Today, puberty, some as young as 9 girls, okay? But in general, puberty is beginning for girls at around 10 to 11. For boys, it's a little bit later, like 11 to 12. And then our kids are incorporating into culture at about 24 to 26. So adolescence keeps being extended, okay? And this idea of going from a boy to a man, it's taking quite a while for our boys to become men. I know a lot of men, and if you're a man in here who does this, I'm sorry, but I know some men who are, I know some men who are 60 and 70 and staying up playing video games till 2 or 3 in the morning. But it's really sometimes difficult to go from boyhood to manhood, and it's just the periods becoming longer when we're getting to that point. In fact, this is something that's really recent over the last number of years. You guys are familiar with this, right? It's boomerang kids, and I'm not here to tell you whether you should ever take your kids back in or not, but you're probably all going to face this, where your kids are going to graduate from college with thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of debt. They've paid, $100,000 of loans, and they get out of college and they're making like $10 or $15 an hour, and they're trying to make it in the world. So a lot of those kids are coming back with their college degree in their boxes, and they're moving back into our homes. And they may be in your home from 22, 23, all the way up to maybe 28-ish, which is the average age now for men to be married. For women, it's about 27 is the actual average age for marriage now. So we live in a different world than we've ever lived in before. And this adolescence period of time, some of you guys are like, I just wish this adolescence would be over. No luck with that, okay? It's going to be a while. So let me encourage you with that as we begin, okay? 4 stages of adolescent development. Ages 9 to 11, this would be pre-adolescence. How many of you guys have kids in this 9 to 11 age, okay? A lot of you. This is pre-adolescence. This is the time of preparation for adolescence where kids are beginning to ask quite a few questions. Like I said, some of our kids are starting to go through puberty here. This is when all of the changes will start taking place, and we're going to hit on those in a minute, what those are. But they're changing emotionally, socially, physically, intellectually. We'll talk a lot about brain development tonight because it's really crazy what goes on in brain development, but lots of questions, lots of changes. Early adolescence would be defined as ages 11 to 14. At this point, puberty has set in. There's lots of changes, lots of newness. Emotions are all over the place. Some of you who have 11 to 14-year-olds, you're starting to experience this. Like one day they're on top of the world, the next it's like a total crash, and it's like, who are you? Like, how is this possible that you can be this person one day and this person the next? But there's emotions, and they're moving from concrete thinking to abstract. Like they're really wrestling through, why does my faith have to be this way? Right? You'll start to see that. Like, mom and dad, they came to church with you their whole life, and they just accepted that we go to church and they love God and all that. And now at this point of their life, they're starting to wonder whether they believe all those things. And it can be very threatening to us as parents. But that's when that's starting to happen, because they're actually starting to develop a mind that thinks abstract and not just concrete. It's actually a good thing. It just causes a lot of struggles in the midst of it. Mid-adolescence, ages 14 to 18. Anybody got a kid in the 14 to 18? Okay. This is experimentation is a major part of this period, which means, again, when I talk about brain development, you'll understand this more, but the idea here that you need to understand is that kids are using the part of their brain all of these years where it's not the judgment part, it's not the rational thinking part, it's the part that's all the excitement and the euphoria. And so they're making decisions that are very much like I was when I was this age, going back into the woods and had my bike, which fortunately was just a bicycle. Today it might be like a motorbike, but I'm going down this humongous hill, and jumping the ramp on my bike with like 3 kids under, like at the other end, trying to jump over, where you just do things and you're like, this seems like fun, right? This is awesome. And it's really dangerous and you could die probably, or the kids under you could die, but you didn't care. Just because it's like, what if I did it? It would be epic if I accomplished this, right? So this is what happens in that 14 to 18 stage of life. Some of you guys are like, my kid's like 8 and he's already doing this, right? Yeah, experimentation, a major part of this period. Kids are often, at this age, you guys know this, cynical about authority. They're very cynical about authority. They're often egocentric. They're often self-absorbed. But then I look at this and I'm like, well, as adults, aren't you egocentric? And aren't you self-absorbed? I think we all probably struggle with that. Friends are very influential in this age, very influential. As parents on the mid-adolescence, you go from being top authority to you might be 3rd or 4th now. Friends are going to be up there, other adults at church, maybe teachers, but as parents, we're kind of moving down the list. In regards to how our kids make us feel, but don't think that you're way down the list in regards to really your kids needing you. Because I'm telling you, parents, whether your kids act like they care about you or want you in their life, you do matter, and you're still the primary place where kids should be getting understanding about life and learning. It's just frustrating because they won't listen. But don't think that you don't matter. They're just, teens are, or their friends are starting to matter more. And at this age, I'm going to tell you, your kids at this age need support more than they need judgment. They need a coach a lot of times. They need someone that's there to kind of coach and talk them through some things. We have to get to a point from the time our kids are kids where we tell them what to do, and you will go to bed at this time, and you will eat this, and you will eat your vegetables, and you will like your vegetables, and you will come home from school at this time, and you will take a 45-minute nap, and like we run their life. And this is mid-adolescence when we have to be transferring our authority a little bit to where they are actually making some of their own decisions. Like they might decide a little bit more when they go to bed. They might actually decide a little bit more what their diet is. Not that you have no say over that, but when I just want a wake-up call for all of us, except my kid who's now still living with me at home even though she's 18. A lot of times at 18, they're leaving you. And we want to get our kids, by the time they leave us, we want to give them the ability to be able to make conscious, rational decisions that are going to benefit their lives. Like they're going to have to live as individuals at some point, so we have to work at getting them to that point, okay? And then late adolescence, ages 18 to mid-20s, like I said, I've got 2 in this. In other generations, this was considered adulthood. Today, parents are seeing their emerging adult children move back home and take longer to live independently. We need to treat them like adult, but lead them like they're an adolescent. So those are some issues that we'll face. Here's kind of the core of this class, and I'm going to give you a lot of ideas to help us understand how we accomplish this. But these are your 2 major tasks as a parent, or I'm going to say as an adolescent. This is what your teen needs to accomplish during their years of adolescence. They need to achieve autonomy and freedom and independence from parents, okay? Autonomy, freedom, independence. This is also a couple other words I'll give you. Individuation. During this time frame, kids need to have individuation, which means becoming individuals that are making decisions for themselves. And then separation, like separation from parents. So individuation, separation, autonomy, freedom, independence. How many of you guys love these words as parents? I know, that's what I think too. But I don't like these words, but it is a reality of what needs to happen. You want your kids to be functioning adults in the world who actually make good decisions. And as long as you are controlling everything, they're not allowed to do that. And the second thing is they're forming an identity. Who am I? So these are identity development, independence, autonomy, individuation, and separation are the 2 major developmental tasks of adolescence. You guys have seen the change in the parent-child relationship when your kids get about 12 years old. They move from dependence towards independence, a huge leap away from mom and dad towards the direction of their friends. And I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes, and then we'll do a little discussion after this. There was a book written. I'm going to give you some book titles. You might want to check some of these out. There's a book titled, Your Teenager is Not Crazy. Okay? Your Teenager is Not Crazy, and it's written by Jeremy and Jeshua Clark. Jeremy, I think it's Jeramy. You can find it on christianbook.com or Amazon. Your Teenager is Not Crazy. They talk about a lot of the things I'm going to talk to you about in the next few minutes in that book, which is basically, some of us feel like they are crazy, but really what's going on in your teenagers is everything in their world is changing. That's really what's happening. For your like 10, 11 to 18-year-old, everything in their life is changing. And a lot of it is related to their brain development. I mean, we've got physical changes. You guys know this. We've all been through puberty. Not a fun time of life, okay? Not a very fun time of life at all. Hair is growing where skin only once lived. Sexual organs are growing, or they may not be growing fast enough. Kids are beginning to compare themselves to other people. A lot of times for girls at this age, it's actually worse to develop quicker. Some of those girls are actually made fun of more. But there's a lot of things that are happening in this time frame. The sequence is going to be the same. These things I've talked to you about, sequence will be the same. Like, they're going to happen the same way, but the timing is really different. I mean, some of you guys have kids who maybe even you've had 2 or 3 kids. One of your kids may have gone through puberty at 10. Another one maybe 12. It's just, it depends on the kid, and a lot of things are involved in that: stress, diet, all kinds of things. But a lot of things. Acne feeds on teenage skin. There's a huge testosterone increase for males during this time frame, and we wonder why men act the way they act. It's because the testosterone in them is going crazy. They have a huge sex drive. I mean, a kid from about the age of 13, this is the crazy thing to me when we talk about purity with kids and how hard it is for a kid to remain pure. Do you know? I mean, at age 13, a boy, has a desire for a sexual release every 48 to 72 hours from age 13. And so if they're getting married at 28 years old, I mean, that's 15 years of life where they have a desire for a sexual release every 48 to 72 hours, and we're asking them to show self-control and be self-controlled until the day they get married, which I think is a good thing. But just so you know how difficult this is, it's why pornography is such a humongous deal. I mean, the statistics are crazy with pornography. We'll talk more about that later on, but I think the statistics are over 50% of boys dealing with pornography at this age. I think it's like almost 75%. And actually, even with girls, it's about 30% of girls during adolescence are actually struggling with pornography, which is crazy. That would have never been the case. But there's a lot happening. Sex drive is going on. Changes come with awkwardness and comparison. I mean, you have girls the exact same age. One's wearing a training bra, and the other one looks like a young adult. Guys the exact same age. One has a mustache and tons of hair on his chest, while other guys are staring daily they're looking in the mirror to wonder when that first hair is going to grow in their armpit, And it's the same age kid. I mean, it's wacko. It's crazy, And then in our schools, they're taking showers together, like especially the guys, and it's just, this is a stressful time. I want us to understand this as parents. It doesn't give our kids excuses for why they do stupid things, but please understand how stressful this time of life is. Okay? Raging hormones, time to take a lot of risks, all that's going on. Okay, what about social? Social changes, right? Our kids are wanting to be self-sufficient. They want their own values. They want to make their own decisions. They're developing intimate relationships with other people, boys and girls, like during this. I mean, they're starting to realize, wow, I'm really attracted to her. He's really good looking, and that's a hard thing for a girl or a guy to go through. Like, is this okay? Like, is it okay if I have feelings for him? And so they're developing intimate relationships. Peer relationships become as important as parent-child. With the world of private cell phones, texting, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, there's ephemeral apps, which are basically, like Snapchat is one of those. We'll talk more about this later, where the information can disappear. Sexting, all the stuff that's going on in the social media world. There are a lot of changes that are taking place. And I'm just going to say, I think it's important as parents at this age with your teens to be proactive and know who your child's best friends are and the greatest influencers in their life are. You need to know who those people are. You need to, privacy, yeah, important. Knock on your kid's door before you go in, but don't ever apologize as a parent. Your number one responsibility is the safety of your kids. And so don't have to apologize if you feel like you're asking a few too many questions or you have a sense that something's not quite right. You need to be proactive in those things. I always felt like for Michelle and I, one of the things we always wanted to do is the best thing you can do is welcome their friends into your home. I always loved it when our girls would bring friends to our house. It was hard for us as parents when we send our kids away to another house because I'm like, I don't know what they believe. I don't even know if they're watching the kids. I don't even know if they're home sometimes. I'd much rather welcome those kids into my home environment. So that's something I would think that you really want to focus on. The social change in this age too, there's a lot of cliques that develop, and you guys realize this, and kids can get left out big time in these cliques. And even in a church, a youth group kind of thing, kids will just click together, and a kid just gets left out. So this is a stressful time of life, physically, social. Another thing I'll say in regards to social, I would encourage you as parents, we do this, we've done this in our home. It's a practice around the dinner table at times where we like to talk to our kids as they're thinking through things. We talk about life-giving and life suckers, life givers and life takers, life givers, life suckers. We talk about this, and I've even made Michelle share and me share, who are the life givers in your life? Who are the people that every time you're with them, you are happy, you feel life, They actually make you want to be a better person. And we'll go around and we'll say, who are those people? And normally when the kids share, as a parent, I'm like, I knew you were going to say that, because you can see it. And then the better part, though, is who are the life takers? Who are the life suckers? And who are your friends that every time you're with them, you're not a better person? You act differently when you've been back from this friend's house, right? Who are those people? Let your kids share that. They may not want to, but eventually they'll do it, and they'll tell you who those people are. And then I can tell them as a parent, man, spend more time with the life givers, spend less time with the life suckers. That's a good question to ask, okay? The next one, emotional change. Emotional change. Adolescent stress, I think, is a growing problem. I think kids are way more stressed today than they've ever been. I just believe that. You guys, when you look back to your childhood, some of you may have had a stressed childhood, but when I think back to my childhood, I think of riding my bikes all over the lake at any time of day, all night long, throwing baseball, playing catch, shooting baskets, playing sports in high school, but showing up to the sports practices 2 weeks before our first game. No weight training, puny me, going out there on the court and making the team and doing really well with no training, okay? What do we have today? We have club sports. We have club sports, which, whether you agree or disagree with it, all I'm saying is they're more stressed. Kids are playing sports year-round. If you tried to show up 2 weeks before practice without shooting a ball or doing anything, you're not going to make the team. You're probably not going to make the team if you don't play a club sport, because the coach on the team's not going to let you play because he doesn't know you that well. It's the battle we face. Kids are working full-time jobs, going to school, playing sports. And I look back to my childhood. I'm driving to a party store and stealing candy from the store. Like that, not that that was good, but jumping ramps and going out on the ice and riding snowmobiles, and those are the memories I have. And these kids today are pretty stressed. Social networks, boy-girl relationships, parent pressure to keep grades up for a future chance at college. Kids are making sexual decisions based on emotional involvement that exceeds their maturity level. All of these things are happening. And I would just say at this age, kids are really self-conscious. Our teenagers are really self-conscious. A lot of them have low self-esteem, low self-worth, lots of up and downs, predictable. And so this is where I'm going to challenge dads at this age, how big of a role you play at this age. I think moms are just kind of wired to always be nurturing and always be caring and always be there. But man, if there's ever a time, dads, that you need to be really involved. I have 3 daughters. I've had to learn this. Sometimes I think I've done a good job. I probably needed to do better. But positive words and positive touch from a dad to a child is extremely important here. I would consider myself to be a pretty affectionate person. I try to hug my girls often. As they get older, I get pushed away more. But I don't underestimate the importance of a dad and the affection that's shown at this age to your kids, because I'm telling you, if you don't show that affection to them as a dad, there are 100 million guys out there that will show them affection. And so if I'm gonna teach proper affection and what that looks like, I should be doing a lot of positive words and a lot of positive touch with my kids. And so I just want to challenge you guys. That's a big deal. Spiritual change. Any of you guys probably seen this at this point. This is tough, okay? Our teens are moving from a concrete faith where mom and dad's way is my way to a more abstract way of thinking, and they may say and do things that go against their parents' views. Your kids may actually not want to go to church sometimes. They might think that that is boring. Like, why would I want to go to church? They may say things about God just to get you upset. They might just make comments and statements. It's a time for some kids of passionate belief, but for other kids, it's a time of passionate doubt. And as a parent and as a youth pastor, I embrace doubt. I love doubt, okay? I love it, as long as they're processing it in a healthy way, because once they process their doubts and they wrestle through their doubts, then what happens to their faith at the end of the doubts, hopefully? I mean, it can go one of two ways. Either they can just give it up, or as they wrestle through it in a good environment where there's conversations going on, their faith actually might be stronger than it was your faith. Like, some of us might have kids whose faith is way stronger than our faith because they've embraced doubt, they've talked it through. Their faith is becoming their own. So we want to make sure that we allow that to happen. Intellectual, most teens go through an identity crisis while in their teens. They experiment with who they want to be, how they want to be perceived, and what life is about. Adolescence, I think, is a time to redefine yourself. Some of our kids are trying to redefine who they are. And rebellion is a regular part of our teenage years. How many of you guys ever rebelled? Okay, none. Okay, good. So your kids might rebel even though you never did. Family authority Les Parrott says that rebellion is a logical consequence of young people's attempts to resolve incongruent ideas and find authentic identity. Like, when they're struggling in that way, they might rebel. It results from a desire to be unique while maintaining the security of sameness. So that's the idea of, I want to be unique, but I kind of want to be the same. I want to be myself, but I want to fit in with everyone else. So it's just tough. All right, the final thing that I want to, these are just some of the things we talked about. Here's something that I think is really important for us to understand, okay, kind of as the core foundation before we get into the practical, how you parent, discipline rules. There's some cool things, interesting things that happen with the teenage brain, okay? So what you'll see is that the teenage brain, or your brain, doesn't fully develop until you're 25 years old. Okay, that's about when the brain is fully developed, is at age 25. The prefrontal cortex is actually developing during adolescence. It's not complete until 25. The prefrontal cortex, these are the things that happen in that part of your brain. So your brain grows from the back forward. The back of your brain all the way to the front of your brain. The front of your brain has this prefrontal cortex. This is what's responsible for empathy, insight, response flexibility, emotion regulation, body regulation, morality, intuition, attuned communication, and fear modulation. Have any of you seen your kids struggle with any of these things? There's a reason, okay? There's absolutely a reason. This is this is nothing that your kids are doing to rebel or be a jerk or an idiot or make your life difficult. Their brain is not developed till 25, and all the things that develop last are all the things that we want our kids to have. We want them to have empathy and insight and, like, emotional regulation and, like, control yourself. Do you realize what you're doing? Like, that's stupid. Well, yeah, it is, because that part of our brain is not, like, it seems like you have no intuition. It doesn't seem like you're thinking through anything. They're not a lot of times, okay? They're operating from the limbic system of their brain, which is the fight, flight, freeze, stress response, which basically means this happened, I do this. This happened, I do this. It's not a processing thing. It's like, I'm just trying to respond to the stimulus that's in front of me. And so I'm making sporadic, quick decisions on the spot, like, I'm going to go down that hill and jump over 3 kids and hope I do it. Like, that's what's going on. Emotions live in this part of the brain. So they're making decisions based on emotions and not on intuition or things like that. So the part of the brain that plays a critical role in decision-making, self-control, judgment, organization, planning, all of that's developed last, okay? Their brain that they're using, teenagers, has an increased sensitivity to rewards, emotions, new experiences, taking risks, and without a fully established dorsal, lateral, prefrontal cortex, the understanding of future consequences doesn't always function. All right? So this is what I'm going to say at the end of this. You've got all of that I just taught you. So add a healthy dose of hormones to peer pressure and a brain that doesn't fully function when it comes to being logical and risky behaviors, and you can understand the uniqueness of the teen years. So you got a jacked up, thrill-seeking, impulsive mind combined with peer pressure, new sex parts, access to substances that can lead to not good results, and we understand why our kids are struggling. So maybe through this whole thing, you gained a little bit of empathy, which I'm going to say later on tonight might be one of the most important things that a parent can have. It doesn't justify decisions our kids are making. It doesn't make their wrong right. It just hopefully will give you a little bit of an understanding of why they're doing what they're doing and why they're struggling so much, okay? So maybe some of you, just a little bit more compassion for your kids, all right? So for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to have you at your tables reflect on these three questions. Looking back, and for some of us this is longer than others, but looking back to when you were a kid, what was the best part of life as a teenager for you? Like looking back, what did you love the most about being a teenager? And looking back, what was the biggest challenge that you faced as a teenager? And then after you share your biggest joy, or the best part of being a teenager and your biggest challenge, I want you to just think for a moment, what do you think are the biggest differences between being a teenager today and when you were a teenager? Does it seem easier or harder to you to be a teenager today, and why? Okay? Just for a few minutes, I'll give you about 5 minutes. Talk amongst yourselves, get to know each. We didn't introduce anyone, so you guys can introduce yourselves if you don't know who you are. But in about 5 minutes, I'll come back and we'll move on to the second part of this class tonight, okay? So we good? All right, go to it. All right, we're going to give you more time to discuss some other things. Hopefully some of these things can be helpful as we continue to process and think through some of the things. I'm not going to get a lot of feedback from you now. Hopefully the conversations were beneficial to you. But I do want to get to the second part of our topic tonight, which is having to do with the goal of parenting. The goal of parenting your teens during these years. And I think the goal that we ought to have as Christian parents probably is a little bit different than the world's goal, okay? So, I mean, I put a few things down, but in you guys' mind, without looking at what I have down here, what would you guys say are some of the world's, when you say what is the world's goal, if you were a successful parent or your kids were successful, what's that look like in the world's eyes? The world's view of successful parenting. Okay, they have a successful job, a lot of money, wife can stay at home if she wants to, good relationships, big home, nice car, trophy wife, prestigious college, okay, a diploma from a very prestigious university. Like if we had, the world would say if your kids, if this is their ultimate end game, you did well. You did well as a parent if your kids turned out to be successful, well-rounded, well-educated, happy, successful kids. Now, I'm not going to minimize that because some of that is okay, right? I mean, is it wrong to be well-educated? No. Is it good to be well-rounded? Yes. I mean, do we want to have successful kids? Yes. But I'm just going to argue that in God's eyes, successful parenting looks different than the world's view of success. It just does, okay? And so we're going to talk a little bit about what the Bible has to say about this. Some of this you're probably familiar with, but God's view of parenting and successful parenting, I'm just going to tell you, it's different than the world's view, okay? So obviously the world's view of parenting and what success looks like in parenting is very different from God's view of parenting. And one of the main areas of Scripture where we find out God's purpose and God's plan for parenting comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. This was known as the Jewish Shema, and so a lot of Jewish families would recite these scriptures over and over again, so they would be very aware of what God was hoping and wanting them to accomplish in their family environment. So I'm going to go ahead and read that beginning in verse 4. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up.
Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframe of your houses and on your gates. So we see in this scripture this vision of passing on what the Jews had learned to their children, which would then eventually be passed on to their children. So it's like a 3-generation vision. I think that's something that we want to have as parents, is not just a vision for how our kids would turn out, but a vision beyond even our kids and their children. I know for my family, my mother, when she grew up, had a very difficult childhood. She was mistreated by her stepfather, didn't grow up in a Christian home at all. And so for her to try to have her family look different than the family before was really important to her. So she started doing some of the things that were talked about in the scripture. She started teaching us formally. We would do family devotions together. We would have prayer times together. There were times where we would do family worship. She was trying to develop something that was not instilled in her as a young person. But I think even more so, we received a lot of informal training as well, where we would just hang out as a family, where we would talk about God, where circumstances that would happen in our lives, we would conversate back and forth, kids and parents. My parents did a great job of modeling godly character and treating others with respect. And so much of that was taught to us. And the thing I want us to understand in regards to this is that I believe the primary place to receive an understanding of God should be the home. And again, not all of us had that opportunity growing up to have this, but it still ought to be the reality for all of us in here. As a church, we want to come alongside you. As a youth pastor for 18 years, my goal was to come alongside parents and to actually be another voice that was kind of speaking the same thing they were speaking into their kids. I wanted to partner with them. But the church should never replace the home as the primary understanding of what God is doing and what God wants. So that needs to be our first and foremost goal as a parent, is to be able to share God, to model that character in the home. Another scripture that speaks to our goal as parents and what God wants us to accomplish comes from Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. And it says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children." And I'm just going to be really honest here. As a parent, this is one of the things I struggled with the most. There were many times where I know that I did exasperate my children, which really just means to frustrate them. You see, I'm a person, a dad that's always been one who has high expectations, whether it be in the home or in my job, when I played sports. I always wanted to be better or to be the best, and I always wanted to push and challenge others to be better and to be the best. And I know that at times as a father in the home, there were many days where I would frustrate my daughters because I always had this view of what I wanted, this end goal of what I wanted to see, and I was very impatient sometimes, and I didn't allow them the time and the opportunity to learn and to grow. I kind of just really had some expectations that I think were unrealistic, and it did exasperate my girls. And so we need to be careful not to exasperate our children, but instead to bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. And this verse talks about the idea of taking our kids by the hand and leading them in the way of the master. It has to do with, as I mentioned just a bit earlier, about modeling godly character. Our kids ought to see us teaching lessons verbally and also by the way that we live our lives. So some of the things that you may want to model as parents is, first and foremost, this idea of forgiveness. What does forgiveness look like when we do mess up, when we do make a mistake, and all of us make mistakes at times? Are we willing to own that mistake and to say, you know what, I screwed this up? Are we apologizing to our husbands and wives when we make mistakes? Are we apologizing to our kids when we make mistakes? We need to model that example, model what we want to see our kids model. We've got to be reflecting that. It's why your marriage is important. It's why you need to invest in your marriage and model healthy conflict in a relationship. You know, growing up, one of the things for me is my parents didn't ever want me to see conflict happen. It would always kind of happen behind closed doors because they felt like it was wrong for us as a kid to experience our parents fighting. My view as a parent is that I actually believe it's healthy to model conflict resolution, conflict management. So there might be times as parents where Michelle and I have actually had a disagreement in front of our kids, and at times our kids from the back seat would even say, Mom, Dad, you're being stupid. And we would have to recognize, you know what, that we were not honoring God in the way that we were having that interaction. And so not only do we have conflict in front of our kids, but then we resolve it. So that our kids need to see us apologizing for that or saying that we're sorry for what we've done. As parents, we model self-image and self-worth and how we look at ourselves and how we view it ourselves and how we define ourselves before God. We model healthy self-image. We model godly character. So as you have children, take them by the hand, show them an example of what it looks like to be a follower of Christ, to be a godly parent, to be a godly example. So that's the second goal I think we want to accomplish. Another goal of parenting that I think God wants us to accomplish is that we would create an environment where the Holy Spirit is allowed to have free reign in the family, creating an atmosphere in our home where God can move and God can work. And one practical way that we have done this as a parent is as our girls have grown up, we have always made it a priority to set the atmosphere of our home by the sorts of music that we play in the home. So often on a Saturday, if we have a chore day where everybody's just kind of working, we'll turn on worship music. It might be a radio station or a Spotify channel or a Pandora channel, and it would be godly music, worship music, because we believe that you can create an atmosphere in your home where God is allowed to work more freely. I find it very difficult to be angry and frustrated and short-tempered and exasperating my girls when I'm listening to music that's God-honoring. Even in the car, for those of you who struggle with road rage or just road anger, try turning on some worship music or godly music sometime, and you'll recognize how awkward and difficult it is sometimes to be angry or frustrated while you're singing Amazing Grace or God, You Are So Good. It's hard to do both of those things. So as parents, you just want to create an environment where the Holy Spirit can have free reign in your family. The focus ought to be on helping connect our kids to Jesus and His will for their life. So as they grow in relationship with Jesus, they're going to hopefully desire to do the right thing and make the right choices. You see, I believe that the end goal of parenting teenagers is not to raise obedient kids, but to raise responsible adults. So we really want to focus on having an environment in our home where the Holy Spirit can work and we can teach the lessons we need to teach them so that our kids will grow up and they'll grow to love the Lord and they'll grow to honor the Lord. So that's another goal of parenting. So build your child's character. Help them become a responsible adult. That is a main role that we have as parents. And again, that begins by modeling what we want them to play out in their lives. So a responsible adult has good work ethic. So model good work ethic. A responsible adult takes ownership for their mistakes. So model taking ownership for your mistakes. A good family will model honesty and authenticity. So model honesty, model authenticity. Be real in front of your kids. Help them to become what you want them to see as they get older. And then help your teen develop a sense of identity. Help your teen establish healthy boundaries. We're going to talk more about that next week on rules and the purpose of rules and consequences and how we play that out in our homes on a regular basis. So we'll talk more about that. Help your kids make wise decisions. And this is allowing your kids to have input and to think through some of the things that they want to accomplish. So a good example of this is my daughter Aubrey is a sophomore at Grace College, and she gave me a call, Michelle and I a call last week. It was kind of an urgent call. She had a meeting with one of her advisors and really wanted to talk about the meeting and what had gone on in the meeting. Well, Aubrey's been doing really well in school, and she actually took a lot of college classes before she went to Grace, so we had kind of known that hopefully she would be able to get through her undergrad program in 3 years instead of 4 years. But after meeting with her advisor this week, she actually found out that she could complete her degree in 2.5 years. And so she, was wrestling in her mind all of the positives and the negatives of the decision and wanted to rehearse that with us. And she's like, Dad, like 2.5 years, that would save me a whole semester worth of money. So my first thought was, let's get it done in 2.5 years. But then she started talking about her college experience and how much she's grown in her college experience. She has. She's grown in confidence tremendously, and how much she's loving that and wanted to live in an apartment with her roommates and experience what life would be like to live in an apartment and to actually be able to go through her whole, I guess it would be senior year and her third year. And so she started weighing all the effects of leaving at semester and early. And then she started sharing with us that her professor had actually said, if she stayed with the 3-year program, she actually could probably pick up a double major. And she's doing, like I said earlier, she's doing occupational therapy. So she had an opportunity to maybe pick up a psychology minor to go, or I'm sorry, she would be able to pick up a minor with that. And that's ultimately what she decided to do after thinking it through and processing it through. She's going to do 3 years, and she's going to, have both of those degrees. And so it's just been really cool to see her begin to do this decision making, weigh the positives and negatives. And as a parent, you want to help your kids think through and process those decisions. I mean, many times you want to make their decision for them, but if you're giving them a way of thinking through things in a healthy way, that's a good thing. And then just developing a relationship with God, helping them to grow in their relationship with the Lord. You can't make it happen, but you can create an environment where the Holy Spirit can do what he wants to do in your kids. So I break it down to this. When you wipe away all of the layers, all of the issues, and all the questions that you face as parents, in the long run, the only question that matters is who I am and how I live and how I parent, providing my child the very best chance to see and experience the Jesus who died to redeem them. That's what ultimately our goal as parents ought to be, is who you are and how you live and how you parent, is it providing your kids the very best chance to see and experience the Jesus who died to redeem them. That if you do that as a parent, you're going to have great success, and God is going to be honored in what you're trying to do. So as we begin this class, this is the foundational piece of our goal in parenting and what we want to accomplish. So, share those scriptures at home. Talk about those ideas at home. 3 important qualities. We'll kind of wrap up our time tonight with a few more things like this, of the 3 qualities that are important for good parenting. And I'm going to break it down to genuineness, personal warmth, and empathy. So the very first is the idea of genuineness. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the best ways that you can be genuine as a parent or model genuineness as a parent is to ask for forgiveness, to sincerely know that what you've done is wrong, and to take ownership, whether it's apologizing to your husband or wife or your kids. And I think it was Ben Franklin that made the statement, never ruin an apology with an excuse. Be humble, be sincere, be genuine. Psychologists actually talk about this idea of mirror neurons, and there are these neurons in your brain that they have figured, as the more they've studied them, that mirror the behavior that they see. And sometimes we mirror things without even understanding that we're doing it. So these mirror neurons, if we see forgiveness modeled and we see sincerity modeled, our brain will want to have us or help us to mirror what the behavior is that we see, and it will just repeat what we see. So that's why we need to learn by watching others. That's how our brain works. Teenagers have a built-in radar detector. They know when you're being phony. They do. They're smarter than what you think, and they know when you genuinely care. So you can do all the right things as a parent, but it won't have an impact on them if they don't sense that you have a genuine desire to know their heart and to understand who they are. Like, our kids need to know that we don't want to just have our kids act out certain things so they can look good, and so we as parents can look good because our kids are honorable and obedient. We want to genuinely care about their heart and their soul, and that ought to be our purpose, and that ought to be our goal. Romans 12:9 says that love must be sincere. So genuineness, that idea of genuineness, is the very first thing I think we want to model as parents. The second is personal warmth. Your teens, in this world that we live in, it's difficult in this world. We all understand that. We know that. Kids can go to school and they can have really rough days. They can be bullied. They can have friendships that just aren't going well. And so your teens may come home from school and you might be the first place all day that they get a clue that they're a valuable person, that they actually matter. And the key to personal warmth, I think, is acceptance. And this isn't the idea of accepting all of their behavior and everything that they do, just saying, oh, it's okay, But it's warmth. It accepts their thoughts. It accepts their feelings. It even recognizes that they're going to make mistakes sometimes and they're going to struggle sometimes, but don't let that be a reflection on you as a parent. Sometimes you can't control, and you are not responsible, or you're not in control for the choices and decisions your kids make, but you are responsible as their parents to make them feel loved, to let them know that you care about them, and to let them know that they're valuable. A great example of this, I think, is a woman at the well. Through our warmth and through our acceptance, we can get a glimpse of God's grace. And the woman at the well, when she was struggling with prostitution and having all these different men in her life, God comes alongside her, and the first thing that he does is these men who are trying to accuse her and tell her that she should be stoned or she should be killed because of this behavior. He comes, and the first thing he says is, those of you who are here, and I would love to see this, those of you without sin, go ahead and cast the first stone. And just this picture of them just dropping their stones and walking away, because they knew they had sin in their lives as well. But they were holier than thou. They didn't accept this woman. They didn't love this woman. They didn't want the best for this woman. And so Jesus has them go away. And this is the point where all of us godly church people would have hoped that Jesus would have confronted her sin at that point, right? He would have called her out for what she was doing wrong. But he doesn't do that. He actually comes close to her and near to her, and he lays his hands on her, and he makes her feel loved. He makes her feel cared for. For a rabbi to actually touch or to show affection to a woman would have been something that didn't hardly ever happen in that culture. But Jesus wanted this woman to know that she mattered. Who she was more important than at that point what she had done. So he loves on her. And then at the end of the story, this will make all of us happy, those of us who want justice to happen. He comes to the woman, he says, now go and sin no more. Leave your life of sin. But he always showed that he loved the person, that he accepted the person, and that he showed grace before he then asked them to live a certain way. So here's the idea. It frees our child from having to feel they have to earn our approval by being perfect when we show warmth and we show acceptance. And when we give it affection. And I'll just say, even for a dad, this is really important as dads. Our daughters especially need to feel affection from us as parents, because they live in a world where any guy will come along and show them affection. And so as a parent, especially in these teenage years, your kids may want to push away the affection, but I've tried to make it a priority to show affection to my girls, to love on them, even if sometimes they say they don't want it. So, and then the third thing, empathy. Third quality of a good parent is that we're empathetic. And this is the quality of being able to put yourself in another person's shoes, to see the world from their perspective, to imagine what life must be like to be lived in their skin. And I know sometimes as parents, one of our favorite lines is, well, when I was a kid, and we try to make our kids appear or feel like everything they're dealing with we've already gone through, and the world that they live in is just like the world that we live in. But we all understand that that's not the case. Our kids are struggling, and they need parents who will listen to them and understand their heart and their feelings, and actually will try to imagine what it feels like to feel what they're feeling. Not just sympathy or to feel bad for them, but to try to get to a place where we truly understand their heart and truly understand what they're going through. In order to do this, we need to rejoice with those who rejoice, and we need to mourn with those who mourn. Sometimes we just need to, when our kids come home and they're hurting, and they tell us what's going on in their heart and mind, we don't have to fix it. We don't have to go into fix-it mode too quick and try to make everything right. Sometimes when our kids come home and they're hurting and they're crying, we need to sit down and hurt, and we need to cry with them. We need to be empathetic. We as parents a lot of times make too many statements when we should just be asking questions, where we should be engaging with them. Because when we ask questions to our kids, it actually engages that part of the brain we talked about earlier, that prefrontal cortex. It actually helps that part of the brain to grow when we're not just telling them what to do or fixing everything, but we're asking them questions and we're helping them process through their thoughts and feelings and show value to that. So we need to ask, we need to listen, and we need to respect. So that leads us to the final thing we're going to talk about this morning, and this is, I believe, one of the most crucial parenting skills that we can have as parents is to be active listeners, to actually engage our kids and not just listen to respond or listen to give an answer, but active listening involves truly hearing what the other person has to say, and then once we've heard what they have to say, to clarify the content. Is this what you mean? Or to reflect the feelings back to them. Is this how you feel? This is important for us to model, not just in our parenting, but in our marriage. You know, so many times I think as a husband, when my wife will share something with me, I go in my mind, I'll listen to what she's saying, but I'm listening to respond. And so I'm not really listening to the heart or the feeling or the content behind what she's saying. And many times I get it wrong. Like if I say, well, you're saying I'm a bad husband, you're saying I'm a bad father, and she's like, no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying there's something that we need to address and we need to focus on, and I need you to understand that, and I need you to hear that. So when she'll share with me, for example, you just haven't been home a lot lately, you know, and I would love you if you could be around the next couple of nights, rather than me responding back, oh, so I'm a bad husband, I'm a bad father. It's like, no, that's not what I was trying to say. I need you to hear my heart. And my heart is that sometimes I feel like the same effort and energy that you're putting into the workplace to have to feel like you're making everyone happy there, I would just like to feel that we're as valuable as that at home. And so we'll go back and forth until I get to the reality of, oh, you just want me to be present, you know? You want me to be here. You want to spend an evening with me where I can engage with the family because you love me and because you care about me. And so we reflect back and forth. We clarify content. With our kids, we need to be doing that, okay? Don't always be the parent that is like the siren that's always going off, where there's always a problem, there's always something difficult happening. Engage conversation with them. Ask the questions. Listen to them and respect them and respect what they have to say. So that's kind of where we're going to end tonight. We talked a little bit about the development, the psychosocial development, why our kids act the way they do, why their brains work the way that it works. We've talked about the ultimate goal of parenting, and at the end of this class, if we look at it and say, man, what's my main takeaway? What do we want to accomplish as a parent? If we mess up on everything else, where do we not want to get it wrong? And so what we've just talked about, I think, is really important with that. You're going to notice in your manual, and I'd love for you a couple things as you leave here tonight that I'd love you to do. The first is you'll see a page that talks about building character, and these are the characteristics that you hope your teenager will develop eventually. I want you to write some of those things down. So as a parent, some homes may value certain things more than others. You might be a couple that is really strong on work ethic, and that might be your number one takeaway as you build character in your kids. You want to see that work ethic. Some of you, it might be authenticity, just being real, honest, and vulnerable. That's an important value for your family. You might have that up at number 1 or 2. For some, it might be learning respect for authority. That's a value you have, is that your kids are going to say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. And even if they disagree with the authority and what they're doing, you're still not going to speak evil of them or wrong of them. So talk about, as a family, what are the characteristics you hope your teenager will develop eventually? Write them down. And then how can you help them develop those characteristics? How can you help model that in the home, whether it be through formal teaching or even informal teaching? So that's the first thing I'm going to ask you to do. And then the second one, you'll see, I believe it's on page 6, it's a homework page. And this week, as you are with your teenagers, do this. I'd encourage you to do this little exercise. Ask your teenagers which of the following of these things is most important to them. So there's a bunch on here, like, is it important that your kids have parents that don't argue in front of them? Is it important that your kids have parents who treat each other, member of the family, the same? It could be parents who are honest, parents who are tolerant of other people. That might be a big value for your kids, is just you're so intolerant. I'd love for you to be more open to understanding of why these other people are living the way that they live. We live in a world of tolerance, and that's something that a lot of our kids want to see us model. Parents who welcome their friends into their home, parents who help build a sense of family identity, parents who answer their questions, actually listen and will help to answer their questions. This is one, I don't know a lot of your kids will give this answer, but parents who impose sanctions when needed, but not in front of others, especially their friends. I think a lot of kids do want structure. A lot of kids do want discipline. They may not tell you that, but man, we know kids who have grown up in homes where the parents have been absent and there was no structure and there was no discipline and there was no guidance. Some of our kids want that. They just don't want us to discipline them or to make light of them in front of their friends. Some want parents who concentrate on good points instead of weaknesses, parents who are consistent, parents who don't shout or don't control them, parents who listen to them, and parents who spend time with them. So have these conversations with your teenagers. I'd love to hear what they have to say, and maybe next week we'll come back and we'll share a few of what are some of the most important things for your kids. So thank you for joining us tonight. Hope that you guys have a good week, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here next Tuesday night as we talk about boundaries and discipline.